This audiobook, prepared by Rusli Weahamat, aims to enlighten listeners about the phenomenon of title and identity theft in Islamic history, particularly by the Salafi Wahhabi movement. Presented in a relaxed yet scholarly style, the book uncovers the terminological games often used to obscure the truth, distort religious understanding, and manipulate Islamic history. May this audiobook serve as a valuable resource for listeners seeking a deeper understanding of these issues. Chapter 1. Introduction. What is title and identity theft? The concept of title and identity theft, as discussed in this audiobook, is not about personal identity fraud in a modern legal sense. Instead, it refers to a historical and ideological phenomenon where individuals or groups appropriate names, titles, or identities that do not authentically belong to them. This practice is not just a trivial matter of semantics. It has profound implications for religious understanding, societal cohesion, and historical accuracy. In the Islamic context, titles and identities often carry deep spiritual, intellectual, and historical significance. They are not mere labels, but represent a legacy of scholarship, piety, and communal trust. For instance, titles such as Azhari, associated with graduates of Al-Azhar University, or affiliations like Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah signify specific theological and intellectual traditions. When these are co-opted or misused, the consequences extend far beyond individual reputations. They affect the collective understanding of Islamic teachings and heritage. The mechanics of theft, title, and identity theft in Islamic history often involve strategic manipulation of terminology. By adopting revered names or associations, groups aim to legitimize their ideologies or actions, often at the expense of truth. For example, the term Salafi originally referred to the pious predecessors, Salaf al-Salih, a term imbued with respect and reverence within Islamic discourse. However, modern groups have adopted this term to mask agendas that may deviate significantly from the principles of these early generations. Similarly, institutions and individuals associated with traditional Islamic learning have been targeted through subtle, and sometimes overt, efforts to redefine or undermine their authority. The appropriation of terms like Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah has created confusion among laypeople, leading many to accept ideologies that are, in reality, far removed from the true teachings of Islam. Historical precedents. This phenomenon is not unique to modern times. Throughout Islamic history, various sects and movements have sought to claim legitimacy by associating themselves with well-established names or identities. For instance, during the Abbasid period, the Mutazilites attempted to align their rationalist theology with Islamic orthodoxy by presenting their interpretations as the definitive truth. However, the scholarly community of that era rigorously countered these claims, preserving the integrity of Islamic teachings. Why it matters today. In today's interconnected world, the consequences of title and identity theft are even more significant. The rise of global media, social platforms, and mass communication has amplified the reach of those who engage in such practices. This has led to widespread misconceptions about Islamic teachings, particularly among younger generations who may lack the tools to discern authentic scholarship from superficial rhetoric. By understanding the dynamics of title and identity theft, we equip ourselves to navigate these challenges with wisdom and clarity. This chapter sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the tactics, implications, and solutions to this pressing issue as we journey through the historical roots and contemporary manifestations of this phenomenon. Chapter 2. Wahhabism, History and Origins. To understand the phenomenon of title and identity theft within the Islamic world, it is essential to first examine the origins and history of Wahhabism. This movement, which emerged in the Arabian Peninsula during the 18th century, has profoundly influenced contemporary Islamic discourse. Despite its controversial beginnings, Wahhabism has managed to spread its ideology far beyond its geographical roots, often rebranding itself under different terminologies to gain acceptance. The founder, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, The Wahhabi movement was founded by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, 1703–1792, a theologian from Najd, a region in present-day Saudi Arabia. His teachings were heavily influenced by the works of Ibn Taymiyyah, a 13th-century scholar known for his critiques of certain theological and mystical practices within Islam. Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's central claim was that Islam had deviated from its original purity, and that it needed to be cleansed of practices he deemed as innovations, bid'ah, or polytheism, shirk. Key elements of his ideology included the rejection of traditional Islamic practices, such as visiting the graves of saints, engaging in intercessory prayers, and the widespread condemnation of Sufi practices. This rigid interpretation of Islam set him apart from the majority of Muslim scholars of his time, who viewed his teachings as extremist and divisive. The political alliance with Ibn Saud. One of the most significant factors behind the spread of Wahhabism was its alliance with political power. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab formed a pact with Muhammad ibn Saud, a tribal leader in Najd. This agreement combined Wahhabism's religious ideology with Ibn Saud's military and political ambitions. Together, they embarked on a campaign to unify the Arabian Peninsula under their rule, using force to suppress opposition and propagate Wahhabism. This alliance laid the foundation for the establishment of the Saudi state, where Wahhabism became the official religious doctrine. The movement's militaristic spread was marked by violence, including the destruction of historical sites and the massacre of communities that resisted their rule. Wahhabism's relationship with Ibn Taymiyyah. While Ibn Taymiyyah's work served as a source of inspiration for Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, it is important to note that Ibn Taymiyyah's context and approach were far more nuanced. Living during a time of Mongol invasions and political instability, Ibn Taymiyyah's critiques were often directed at specific practices he believed were detrimental to the Muslim community of his era. However, Wahhabism selectively adopted and simplified his teachings, ignoring the broader intellectual depth and context of his works. This selective adoption allowed Wahhabism to present itself as the true inheritor of Ibn Taymiyyah's legacy, despite the significant differences in methodology and interpretation. The spread of Wahhabism beyond Arabia. The discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia during the 20th century gave Wahhabism the financial resources needed to expand its influence globally. Through funding mosques, educational institutions, and publishing houses, the Wahhabi movement was able to disseminate its ideology to Muslim majority and minority communities worldwide. However, this expansion was not without controversy. Many Islamic scholars and institutions resisted Wahhabism's simplistic and literalist interpretation of Islamic teachings, which often clashed with the rich diversity of traditional Islamic thought. Early criticism and rejection. From its inception, Wahhabism faced significant criticism from scholars across the Islamic world. Traditional Sunni scholars, particularly those from the Azhari, Maturidi, and Sufi traditions, condemned the movement for its harsh and divisive rhetoric. The Ottoman Empire, which governed much of the Muslim world at the time, also actively opposed Wahhabism, viewing it as a threat to Islamic unity. Conclusion. A controversial beginning. Wahhabism's history and origins reveal a movement that was as much about political ambition as it was about religious reform. Its alliance with the Saudi state allowed it to grow in power and influence, but its rigid and literalist approach to Islam has made it a source of division within the Muslim community. Understanding the roots of Wahhabism is crucial for unraveling the subsequent terminological games and identity theft that this audiobook seeks to address. The next chapter will explore how Wahhabism evolved into the term Salafi, a rebranding effort aimed at broadening its appeal and obscuring its controversial past. Chapter 3. From Wahhabi to Salafi. Evolution of name and purpose. The rebranding of the Wahhabi movement into what is now widely known as the Salafi movement is a critical step in understanding how terminological games have been used to alter perceptions and influence religious discourse. This chapter delves into the reasons behind this name change, its implications, and how it has served to obscure the movement's controversial origins and agenda. Why the name change? By the early 20th century, the term Wahhabi had garnered negative connotations, associated with extremism, violence, and division. The movement's critics, including traditional Sunni scholars and the Ottoman establishment, used the term to highlight its deviation from mainstream Islamic thought. Recognizing the growing resistance to the label, leaders of the Wahhabi movement sought to distance themselves from this stigmatized identity. Adopting the term Salafi allowed the movement to associate itself with the early generations of Muslims, known as the Salaf al-Salih, the pious predecessors. This clever rebranding not only helped the movement shed its negative image, but also positioned it as the true heir to the pure and unadulterated teachings of Islam. The misuse of Salafi identity. Historically, the term Salafi referred to scholars who emphasized adherence to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, as well as those of the two succeeding generations. These scholars, including figures like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, advocated for a return to the Quran and Sunnah, while respecting the diversity of Islamic thought and tradition. However, the Wahhabi appropriation of the term Salafi was far more restrictive and ideological. By conflating their rigid, literalist interpretation of Islam with the legacy of the Salaf al-Salih, they created an illusion of continuity and authenticity. This rebranding enabled them to appeal to Muslims seeking a return to the purity of early Islam, while simultaneously distancing themselves from the divisive reputation of Wahhabism. The role of modern media and education. The rebranding effort was bolstered by the strategic use of modern media and education systems. Funded by the vast oil wealth of Saudi Arabia, the movement established publishing houses, satellite television channels, and online platforms to propagate its ideology under the Salafi banner. Educational institutions were also key to this strategy, with scholarships and funding provided to students from around the world to study in Saudi Arabia. Graduates of these programs often returned to their home countries as self-proclaimed Salafis, promoting the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam as the only legitimate understanding. The term Salafi thus became a global brand, masking the ideological roots of the movement and giving it an air of legitimacy. The impact on traditional Islamic thought. The adoption of the Salafi label has had a profound impact on traditional Islamic thought. Many Muslims, unaware of the historical and theological distinctions, have come to equate Salafism with authentic Islam. This has led to the marginalization of other schools of thought, particularly those rooted in Azhari, Maturidi, and Sufi traditions. The rebranding has also created divisions within Muslim communities, as Wahhabi Salafi adherents often label other Muslims as innovators, mubtadi, or even apostates, kafir. This exclusivist approach has fueled sectarianism and weakened the unity of the Islamic world. Unmasking the agenda. While the term Salafi may sound inclusive and rooted in Islamic history, its use by the Wahhabi movement is a calculated strategy to gain credibility and influence. By appropriating a term with deep spiritual and historical significance, the movement has effectively concealed its divisive and extremist agenda. Conclusion: the importance of terminological clarity. The evolution from Wahhabi to Salafi is not just a superficial name change. It represents a deliberate attempt to rewrite history and manipulate perceptions. For Muslims seeking to navigate the complexities of contemporary Islamic discourse, it is essential to understand the true origins and implications of these terms. Only by unmasking these terminological games can we preserve the rich diversity and unity of the Islamic tradition. The next chapter will explore how this terminological strategy extends to institutions like Al-Azhar, where attempts have been made to appropriate prestigious titles such as Azhari to further the Wahhabi Salafi agenda. Chapter 4. Terminological Games. Al-Azhar and the title of Azhari Al-Azhar, the renowned institution of Islamic learning, has long been a symbol of traditional Sunni scholarship and intellectual rigor. Throughout its history, Al-Azhar has produced scholars known as Azhari, a title that signifies profound knowledge of Islamic sciences, rooted in the traditions of Ash'ari, Maturidi, and Sufi thought. However, in recent decades, there has been a deliberate effort by the Wahhabi Salafi movement to appropriate this prestigious title, distorting its meaning and undermining its legacy. The legacy of Al-Azhar. Founded in the 10th century in Cairo, Al-Azhar has been a beacon of Islamic learning for over a millennium. It represents a rich tradition of intellectual inquiry combining jurisprudence, fiqh, theology, aqidah, and spirituality, tasawwuf. The Azhari title has historically been reserved for those who embody this holistic approach to Islamic knowledge. Being an Azhari is more than academic. It reflects adherence to a tradition that values scholarly integrity, respect for diversity, and a deep understanding of Islamic principles. The Azhari legacy stands in direct contrast to the narrow literalism and exclusivism of Wahhabi Salafi ideology. Attempts to appropriate the title, recognizing the influence and credibility of Al-Azhar, Wahhabi Salafi proponents have sought to co-opt the Azhari identity. This has been achieved in several ways. 1. Infiltration of Al-Azhar. Wahhabi Salafi organizations have strategically funded scholarships and programs at Al-Azhar, creating opportunities for students sympathetic to their ideology to gain credentials from the institution. These individuals often return to their countries claiming the Azhari title while promoting Wahhabi Salafi teachings. 2. Selective quotations of Azhari scholars. In their publications and lectures, Wahhabi Salafi advocates frequently misquote or selectively cite Al-Azhar scholars to create the illusion of alignment with their ideology. By doing so, they aim to legitimize their views under the guise of Azhari scholarship. 3. Rebranding Wahhabi Salafi preachers. Some Wahhabi Salafi preachers who have studied briefly at Al-Azhar adopt the Azhari title, despite lacking the depth of training and adherence to its traditional methodologies. This misrepresentation misleads audiences into associating Wahhabi Salafi teachings with Al-Azhar's prestigious legacy. Distorting the meaning of Azhari. By appropriating the Azhari title, Wahhabi Salafi proponents aim to dilute its traditional meaning. In their hands, the title becomes a mere credential, rather than a reflection of scholarly depth and ethical commitment. This not only tarnishes the reputation of Al-Azhar, but also sows confusion among Muslims seeking authentic religious guidance. Defending Al-Azhar's legacy. It is crucial to defend the integrity of Al-Azhar and the Azhari title against these distortions. This involves 1. Educating the public Muslims must be made aware of what it truly means to be an Azhari, a scholar rooted in traditional Sunni thought, not merely someone with a diploma from Al-Azhar. 2. Supporting true scholars. Communities should prioritize learning from authentic Azhari scholars who uphold the institution's legacy of balanced and nuanced scholarship. 3. Exposing misrepresentation. Wahhabi Salafi attempts to co-opt the Azhari identity must be called out and countered with evidence, ensuring that the public understands the differences between these ideologies. Conclusion. The title of Azhari is not just an academic distinction, but a symbol of the rich intellectual and spiritual heritage of Al-Azhar. Allowing it to be misused by Wahhabi Salafi proponents risks eroding its significance and misleading the Muslim community. By defending the legacy of Al-Azhar, we safeguard a tradition that has long been a cornerstone of Islamic unity and understanding. The next chapter will delve into the contested title of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah, exploring who truly owns this designation and why its appropriation by the Wahhabi Salafi movement is a misrepresentation of Islamic tradition. Chapter 5. Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. Who truly owns this title? The term Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah, the people of the Sunnah and the community, has been central to Islamic discourse for centuries. It represents the majority of Muslims who adhere to the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the consensus of his companions. However, in recent history, the Wahhabi Salafi movement has attempted to claim this title exclusively for itself, disregarding the established understanding upheld by the Azhari, Maturidi, and Sufi schools of thought. The traditional understanding of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. Historically, Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah encompasses the following key groups. 1. The Azhari and Maturidi schools of theology. These two schools represent the intellectual and theological framework of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. They emphasize reasoned faith, adherence to the Quran and Sunnah, and the balance between literal and metaphorical interpretations. 2. The four Sunni schools of jurisprudence, madhab. The Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools provide the legal structure for Sunni Muslims, offering a diversity of interpretations rooted in the Quran and Sunnah. 3. The Sufi tradition. Sufism represents the spiritual dimension of Islam, focusing on the purification of the soul and the inward journey toward Allah. This tradition has always been integral to the identity of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. The Wahhabi Salafi claim. The Wahhabi Salafi movement asserts that it alone represents the true Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah, often labeling traditional Sunni Muslims as deviant. This claim is based on their rigid literalism, rejection of theological schools, and opposition to Sufi practices. They disregard centuries of Islamic scholarship, reducing the faith to a simplistic and often harsh interpretation. Misuse of the title. The Wahhabi Salafi appropriation of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah involves several strategies. 1. Dismissing traditional scholarship. Wahhabi Salafi preachers often reject the contributions of Ash'ari, Maturidi, and Sufi scholars, portraying them as innovations, bid'ah, or deviations from Islam. 2. Selective use of hadith and Quran. Their approach involves cherry-picking verses and hadiths to support their ideology, often ignoring the context or the consensus of classical scholars. 3. Labeling opponents as deviant Muslims who follow traditional practices or align with established schools of thought are often accused of shirk, associating partners with Allah, or kufr, disbelief. This creates unnecessary divisions within the Muslim community. The true owners of the title. The claim to Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah cannot be monopolized by any single group, especially one that dismisses the rich diversity of Islamic tradition. The true bearers of this title are those who adhere to consensus, ijma. They respect the collective agreement of the ulama, scholars, across generations. Value intellectual diversity. They acknowledge the validity of different schools of thought and avoid rigid literalism, maintain spiritual depth. They uphold the importance of Sufi practices in nurturing the soul and connecting with Allah, preserving the legacy. To counter the Wahhabi Salafi narrative, Muslims must 1. Educate themselves. Understanding the history and principles of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah is crucial to preserving its legacy. 2. Support authentic scholars. Communities should seek guidance from scholars who are rooted in traditional Sunni methodologies. 3. Promote unity. Rather than dividing over minor differences, Muslims should focus on shared beliefs and values. Conclusion. The title Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah is not a badge of exclusivity but a representation of the collective wisdom and unity of the Muslim community. It belongs to those who honor its intellectual, legal, and spiritual dimensions, not to those who distort it for ideological gain. In the next chapter, we will explore how Wahhabi Salafi proponents manipulate educational institutions, including Al-Azhar, as part of their strategy to reshape Islamic discourse. Chapter 6. New Strategies. Manipulation. Through education. One of the most effective tools in the Wahhabi Salafi movement's arsenal is the manipulation of educational systems. By infiltrating institutions of higher learning and leveraging their resources, This movement has sought to reshape Islamic discourse and influence the next generation of Muslim scholars. This chapter delves into their tactics, focusing particularly on their activities in prestigious institutions like Al-Azhar University. The importance of education in Islamic history education has always been a cornerstone of Islamic civilization. Institutions like Al-Azhar, established over a millennium ago, have served as bastions of Sunni orthodoxy, upholding the traditions of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. These institutions have produced generations of scholars who have preserved and transmitted Islamic knowledge. The Wahhabi Salafi infiltration. Recognizing the power of education, the Wahhabi Salafi movement has adopted several strategies to influence educational institutions. 1. Funding and scholarships. Wahhabi Salafi organizations, backed by wealth from oil-rich states, have offered lucrative scholarships to students from around the world. These students are often educated in Wahhabi ideology and later return to their home countries to propagate this version of Islam. 2. Influencing curricula. Through financial support, Wahhabi Salafi groups have pressured institutions to revise their curricula, incorporating Wahhabi interpretations and downplaying traditional Sunni methodologies. 3. Establishing new institutions. In some cases, they have bypassed traditional institutions entirely by establishing their own universities and seminaries. These schools promote Wahhabi ideology under the guise of Islamic education. The case of Al-Azhar University, one of the most respected Islamic institutions in the world, has not been immune to these tactics. While the majority of its scholars and administrators remain committed to the principles of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah, Wahhabi Salafi groups have made concerted efforts to influence students offering scholarships to Azhar students, particularly those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, to study in Wahhabi-controlled institutions like those in Saudi Arabia. Recruit graduates, encouraging Azhar graduates to join Wahhabi-aligned organizations by offering lucrative positions and funding for their projects. Challenge traditional scholars. Wahhabi Salafi preachers often publicly debate and discredit Azhar scholars, attempting to undermine their authority. Consequences of educational manipulation. The Wahhabi Salafi infiltration into education has had profound effects on the Muslim world. 1. Erosion of traditional knowledge. Centuries of Islamic scholarship are being sidelined in favor of a narrow, rigid interpretation of Islam. 2. Divisions within the Ummah. The rise of Wahhabi-trained preachers has led to increasing polarization, as they label traditional Sunni practices as bid'ah or shirk. 3. Confusion among lay Muslims. Many Muslims, particularly in non-Arab countries, struggle to differentiate between authentic Islamic teachings and Wahhabi distortions, resisting the manipulation. To counter these strategies, it is essential to 1. Strengthen traditional institutions. Support institutions like Al-Azhar by providing independent funding and resources to prevent financial reliance on Wahhabi donors. 2. Educate communities, raise awareness about the dangers of Wahhabi ideology and the importance of adhering to traditional Sunni Islam. 3. Empower scholars. Encourage scholars to speak out against Wahhabi distortions and provide accessible, accurate Islamic knowledge to the public. Conclusion. The manipulation of education by the Wahhabi Salafi movement is a calculated strategy to gain ideological dominance. By infiltrating and influencing prestigious institutions, they aim to reshape Islamic thought and undermine traditional Sunni practices. However, through vigilance, education, and support for authentic scholarship, the Muslim community can resist this encroachment and preserve its rich intellectual and spiritual heritage. In the next chapter, we will explore how the Wahhabi Salafi movement misinterprets tradition and history, further contributing to confusion within the Muslim world. Chapter 7. Misinterpretations of Tradition and History. The manipulation of titles and identities by the Wahhabi Salafi movement extends beyond names and institutions. It also involves deliberate misinterpretation of Islamic traditions and history to suit their ideological narrative. This chapter uncovers the ways in which Wahhabi Salafi proponents distort the legacy of Islam and examines the resulting confusion within the Muslim community. The role of tradition in Islamic identity. Tradition forms the backbone of Islamic identity, encompassing centuries of scholarship, rituals, and cultural practices rooted in the Quran and Sunnah. The integrity of these traditions ensures the continuity of Islamic teachings. However, Wahhabi Salafi adherents often present themselves as reformers, claiming to purify Islam by rejecting practices they deem to be innovations, bid'ah. This approach frequently leads to a selective and ahistorical reading of Islamic tradition, disregarding its rich diversity. Historical revisionism. One of the most troubling tactics of the Wahhabi Salafi movement is the revision of Islamic history to align with their ideology. Examples include 1. Rejection of Sufi heritage. Sufi saints and scholars, who have historically contributed to Islamic spirituality and knowledge, are often dismissed as deviants or idol worshippers. Practices such as visiting the graves of pious individuals are labeled as shirk, despite their long-standing acceptance in Sunni tradition. 2. Downplaying the role of scholars. Renowned scholars such as Imam Azhari, Imam Maturidi, and Imam Ghazali are marginalized, while Ibn Taymiyyah and his followers are elevated as the sole representatives of Sunni Islam. The contributions of diverse Islamic schools of thought are ignored, fostering a narrow interpretation of Islamic history. 3. Misrepresentation of historical events. The narrative surrounding the early Islamic period, particularly the conflicts between the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is often distorted to support their arguments against certain practices. Key historical figures and events are selectively interpreted to delegitimize traditional Sunni practices. Misinterpretation of key concepts. Wahhabi Salafi proponents also misinterpret foundational Islamic concepts to fit their agenda. Examples include 1. Tawheed, oneness of God. While the concept of Tawheed is central to Islam, Wahhabi Salafi adherents often redefine it in a way that excludes practices like seeking intercession, tawassul, or blessings, tabarruk, which have deep roots in Islamic tradition. 2. Bid'ah, innovation. The term bid'ah is frequently weaponized to label any practice not explicitly mentioned in the Quran or Sunnah as impermissible, ignoring the nuanced classifications of bid'ah by traditional scholars. 3. Shirk, associating partners with God. Actions such as honoring the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through poetry or celebrations like Mawlid, are unfairly equated with shirk, creating unnecessary divisions among Muslims. The confusion among Muslims. The Wahhabi Salafi distortion of tradition and history has caused significant confusion within the Muslim world. Erosion of trust. Many Muslims, particularly the youth, are left unsure about which practices are authentic and which are not. Increased sectarianism. The labeling of traditional Sunni practices as shirk or bid'ah has deepened divisions between Muslims. Loss of cultural heritage communities with rich Islamic traditions, such as the Malay world and South Asia, have been pressured to abandon their cultural expressions of Islam. Preserving the integrity of tradition. To counter these misinterpretations, it is essential to 1. Educate on the nuances of Islamic scholarship. Muslims must be made aware of the diverse methodologies within Sunni Islam and the legitimacy of practices rooted in tradition. 2. Promote historical awareness. Efforts should be made to study and teach Islamic history objectively, highlighting the contributions of various scholars and schools of thought. 3. Empower traditional institutions. Institutions like Al-Azhar and traditional Islamic seminaries must be supported in their efforts to preserve Sunni orthodoxy. Conclusion. The misinterpretation of tradition and history by the Wahhabi Salafi movement represents a significant challenge to Islamic unity and identity. By selectively rewriting history and redefining core concepts, they have created confusion and division among Muslims. However, through education, historical integrity, and the promotion of authentic Islamic teachings, it is possible to counter these distortions and preserve the rich legacy of Islam for future generations. In the next chapter, we will examine the broader impact of these tactics on the Islamic world, including the divisions and misunderstandings that have emerged as a result. Chapter 8: Impact on the Islamic World. The terminological games and manipulative strategies employed by the Wahhabi Salafi movement have left a profound impact on the Islamic world. This chapter delves into the social, theological, and political consequences of these tactics, highlighting how they have sown division and misunderstanding among Muslims globally. The fragmentation of the Muslim Ummah. One of the most visible effects of the Wahhabi Salafi agenda is the fragmentation of the Muslim community, Ummah. By labeling long-standing practices and beliefs as innovations, bid'ah, or shirk, they have alienated many traditional Muslim communities. 1. Sectarian divisions. The aggressive rejection of Azhari, Maturidi, and Sufi traditions has created deep rifts between Wahhabi Salafi followers and adherents of traditional Sunni Islam. Communities that once lived harmoniously have become embroiled in theological disputes fueled by Wahhabi Salafi rhetoric. 2. Marginalization of traditional scholars. Many respected scholars and institutions are accused of promoting falsehoods simply for upholding traditional Islamic practices. This undermines their credibility and authority within their communities. The erosion of Islamic heritage. Another significant impact is the erosion of Islamic heritage, both tangible and intangible. 1. Destruction of historical sites. Sacred sites, graves of prominent Islamic figures, and historical landmarks have been destroyed under the pretext of preventing idolatry. Examples include the demolition of shrines in Mecca and Medina. 2. Loss of cultural identity. Rich Islamic traditions, such as Sufi poetry, music, and art, are dismissed as un-Islamic, leading to a decline in cultural practices that have shaped the identity of Muslim societies for centuries. 3. Suppression of local customs. In regions like Southeast Asia, traditional expressions of Islam such as wayang kulit, dikir barat, and zikir have been condemned, threatening the survival of these cultural treasures. Theological confusion and radicalization. The Wahhabi Salafi emphasis on rigid literalism and rejection of traditional interpretations has created widespread theological confusion. 1. Simplistic views of Islam. By promoting a black-and-white understanding of Islam, Wahhabi Salafi teachings leave little room for the nuanced and contextual interpretations that have long been a hallmark of Islamic scholarship. 2. Pathway to extremism. The rejection of traditional Islamic moderation has, in some cases, led to radicalization. The Wahhabi Salafi narrative provides a theological foundation for extremist ideologies that have fueled global terrorism. Political consequences. The influence of Wahhabi Salafi ideology extends beyond theology into the political sphere. 1. Export of ideology. Funded by wealthy patrons, Wahhabi Salafi institutions have spread their ideology globally, often overshadowing local Islamic traditions. 2. Polarization within communities. Their presence in Muslim-majority countries has often led to political polarization, as governments and communities struggle to navigate the challenges posed by this divisive ideology. Efforts to counter the impact. Despite these challenges, there have been concerted efforts to counter the Wahhabi Salafi influence. 1. Strengthening traditional institutions. Institutions like Al-Azhar and traditional madrasas continue to play a crucial role in preserving authentic Islamic teachings. 2. Reviving Islamic heritage. Scholars, activists, and cultural practitioners are working to revive and protect endangered aspects of Islamic heritage. 3. Promoting unity efforts to bridge gaps between different Muslim sects focus on shared beliefs and values, fostering unity within the Ummah. Conclusion. The impact of Wahhabi Salafi tactics on the Islamic world has been profound, leading to division, loss of heritage, and theological confusion. However, the resilience of traditional Islamic institutions and communities offers hope for the preservation of authentic Islamic teachings and unity among Muslims. In the next chapter, we will explore efforts to restore lost identities and correct the misunderstandings propagated by these terminological games. Chapter 9. Truth and Justice: Restoring Lost Identities. Restoring the integrity of Islamic titles and identities requires a concerted effort grounded in truth, justice, and a commitment to the principles of unity and authenticity. This chapter explores the steps needed to counter the distortions caused by terminological games, reclaim the true essence of Islamic heritage, and rebuild trust among Muslims. Reclaiming the authentic meaning of titles. 1. Reviving the legacy of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. Emphasizing the Azhari, Maturidi, and Sufi traditions as the authentic representatives of Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah. Educating the public about the historical and theological foundations of this title to prevent its misuse. 2. Defending Al-Azhar's authority, highlighting Al-Azhar's long-standing role as a beacon of moderate Islamic scholarship, exposing attempts to misappropriate the title Azhari by those who do not adhere to its intellectual and spiritual traditions. Promoting education and awareness. 1. Strengthening traditional Islamic education, encouraging the revival of madrasas and institutions that uphold the teachings of traditional scholars, providing access to authentic texts and teachings to counter Wahhabi Salafi narratives. 2. Public awareness campaigns, using modern platforms like social media, YouTube, and podcasts to educate the masses about the dangers of identity theft in Islam, highlighting the contributions of traditional Islamic scholars in preserving the faith. Building unity among Muslims. 1. Focusing on shared beliefs. Promoting the understanding that all Muslims share common principles, such as belief in Allah, the Quran, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. De-emphasizing divisive issues while fostering mutual respect and understanding. 2. Encouraging intersect dialogue. Organizing dialogues and conferences to bridge gaps between different Muslim sects, addressing misunderstandings and building consensus on key theological issues. Correcting misrepresentations. 1. Academic research and publications. Supporting scholars to produce research that clarifies historical inaccuracies and misrepresentations caused by Wahhabi Salafi rhetoric. Publishing books, articles, and papers that reclaim Islamic history and theology from distortion. 2. Preserving cultural heritage, protecting traditional practices such as Sufi rituals, arts, and cultural expressions from being dismissed as bid'ah or shirk. Encouraging communities to take pride in their unique Islamic heritage. Upholding justice and integrity. 1. Calling for accountability. Urging scholars and leaders to expose the strategies used to manipulate Islamic titles and identities. Holding those responsible for these distortions accountable through academic debate and dialogue. 2. Living by Islamic principles. Encouraging Muslims to embody the principles of justice, truth, and integrity in all aspects of life. Reminding individuals and communities that Islam calls for fairness and honesty in dealing with others. Conclusion. Restoring lost identities in the Islamic world is a shared responsibility. By reclaiming the true meanings of titles, promoting education, and fostering unity, Muslims can overcome the divisions caused by terminological theft. Truth and justice are not mere ideals, but the very foundation upon which the faith is built. The final chapter will explore why maintaining integrity in understanding and representing Islam is crucial for the future of the Ummah. Chapter 10. Conclusion. Why integrity matters. As we reach the final chapter, it becomes clear that the integrity of titles and identities in Islam is not a trivial matter. It holds profound implications for the unity, authenticity, and future of the Ummah. In this chapter, we emphasize the vital importance of maintaining honesty, clarity, and respect in understanding and representing Islamic teachings and history. The role of integrity in religion. 1. Preserving the truth of Islam. Integrity ensures that Islamic teachings remain undistorted, preserving the maqasid Sharia, objectives of the Sharia. Without honesty and scholarship, the Ummah risks deviating from the path of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. 2. Avoiding divisions and misunderstandings. Misuse of titles and identities leads to confusion, mistrust, and unnecessary divisions within the Ummah. By upholding integrity, Muslims can focus on shared beliefs and values instead of falling victim to divisive rhetoric. Lessons from the past. 1. Historical consequences of identity theft. The appropriation of titles like Azhari and Ahlussunah Wal Jamaah has caused significant damage to Islamic unity. Reflecting on these historical episodes helps us understand the importance of vigilance in protecting Islamic heritage. 2. The example of true scholars. Scholars like Imam al-Ghazali, Imam Ash'ari, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jailani serve as examples of individuals who upheld the truth despite challenges. Their legacies remind us that integrity is the hallmark of genuine scholarship. Moving forward. Integrity as a collective responsibility. Sown. 1. Education as a tool for integrity. Islamic institutions must prioritize teaching authentic interpretations of the Quran, Hadith, and Islamic history. Students and scholars must be trained to critically analyze claims and distinguish between genuine and distorted narratives. 2. A call for unity. Muslims must work together to counter misinformation and restore trust among different groups within the Ummah. Unity requires not only shared beliefs but also mutual respect and understanding of diverse traditions within Islam. A vision for the future. 1. Reclaiming authenticity. Reclaiming lost identities is not just about correcting the past. It is about securing the future of Islam. Efforts must be made to document and preserve the contributions of traditional scholars and institutions. 2. Building a stronger Ummah. A united and informed Ummah can better address the challenges of modernity, from misinterpretations of Islam to external threats. By prioritizing integrity, Muslims can become ambassadors of a faith rooted in truth, justice, and compassion. Final reflections. The journey through this audiobook has revealed the dangers of title and identity theft and the importance of protecting Islamic heritage from distortion. As listeners, you are now equipped with the knowledge to discern truth from falsehood and to contribute to the preservation of Islam's rich legacy. Integrity matters because it is the foundation of trust, the essence of justice, and the soul of faith. Without it, the Ummah risks losing its direction. But with it, we can aspire to a future where Islam is understood, respected, and practiced as it was meant to be, guided by truth and illuminated by the wisdom of its authentic scholars. May this conclusion inspire all listeners to uphold the principles of integrity in their own lives, ensuring that Islam remains a beacon of light for generations to come. End of audiobook.